Full Spectrum News, February 6th, 2021. Hosted by Rob Yox. Brought to you by Full Spectrum Network. Welcome, everybody, to Full Spectrum News. My name is Rob Yox. We have a special report that I had felt the need to bring to the audience. This is a diabolical, just outright in your face manipulation of anything and everything that they could get their hands on. And when I say they, you know who I'm talking about. And let's just start by prefacing what exactly this is. The New York Times, I'm sorry, not the New York Times. New York Times is relevant in this, but the Times Magazine comes out with articles. These articles have been right on the money. They can classify themselves, bias in a way or unbiased in some ways, but the gentleman who owns Time Magazine is a outright liberal, donated millions of dollars to Joe Biden. And, we have to look at what they're saying in a specific article. And I'm going to bring the article up because this is going to be the entire episode is going to be about this article and what it means, what they're saying. And it's going to be a complete breakdown of what we're looking at is the wording of this article. The wording is one of the biggest things to look at because words mean something. When you say a difference between an and an a or a the, if or did, there's a lot of different speculations on how words work. It's not speculatory. This is a outright plan on how they believe that they saved democracy by putting together a cabal, their own words, and a conspiracy, also their own words, that this specific plan of action that they took saved everybody. And now this is far removed in the sense of it's almost, we're coming into the 15 days that this gentleman has been in office, and the executive orders coming out of the office are just ridiculous. And when you look at what's happening to specific people on the big platforms, on, as in media and also in tech, it's all of these components put together this system and this coalition of people that were outright against Donald Trump. Now I'm going to get excited during spots on this, and this might take us longer than a half hour to go through. I have 5 pages of notes that I've written down, and the first thing that we want to do is we're going to go over just the title right off the bat. We're going to break down this entire article. So we're going to go into the title of it. It says, "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." So, secret history, nobody knew about it. Shadow campaign. Of course, the underlying campaign of this conglomerate of all different facets of our society that came together to perpetrate their candidate. And we know that there was irregularities. And I apologize if I'm pausing. I'm thinking of what to say because it's so flabbergasting. And a lot of people came out yesterday and did this. I saw this yesterday morning and I read it. And I was so fired up about what I was reading that I couldn't even get into talking about it intelligently without actually putting emotion behind it. But I had to analyze it from a point of view of, not right, not left, but just what they're saying and what we already know has gone down. So, what I'm going to do right off the bat, I'm going to make it the full screen so you can read it along with me, but also so we can highlight certain areas. And then when we get into those certain areas, we're going to talk about what exactly happened and what they mean. Okay. This is going to it's going to be a process. It's going to take a while, but bear with me because not only is there showing us how they did it, I have the why they did it, which not a lot of people are talking about. And if you look at our last episode of Full Spectrum News, we talked about the cabinet ties to China. There is so many different things that have to collude with China that it's baffling. And the fact that people behind the scenes let this happen, or maybe they didn't let it happen, they didn't know that it happened. There are some criminal aspects in this article. What they're admitting to has criminality. And we're going to go over that too, because if this would have been the shoe was on the other foot, if this would have happened the other way, and everybody knows what I mean by the other way, there would be a lot of people in jail right now. A lot of people. Or at the behest of society, they would be canceled, which may actually happen for me saying some of the things that I say today, but I'm going to try my best to not go over those lines. So I may hint at things, I may code things because talking about them may get us in trouble. We don't want to get in trouble, but we want to make sure that we give you the reality of what's being said in this specific article. And a lot of it is prefaced that they're saving. They had to do this. There was no other option. This Donald Trump was a dictator, and they call him, an autocrat. We're going to get to what an autocrat means when we get into that spot, but he was an autocrat. He was a borderline dictator. He was ruining society. 74 million people didn't believe that. Actually, if you look at what these liberals did, they are the minority. And if anybody saw Mike Lindell's video that dropped on Friday that got taken off of Vimeo, it got taken off of YouTube, it was taken off a lot of different platforms. They keep saying that it was Mike Lindell's fever dream. He can't prove it. It's only his opinion. Even OAN said that. And I heard an interview with Mike Lindell this morning that says that he understood why they had to do that, because they were saving their own skin in the game. He doesn't want to bring trouble on anybody, which is admirable. This man is the American honey badger. He is relentless. And he said he's even going to use his own money to fight against big tech, to fight against censorship, and to fight against Dominion. We all know who Dominion is. I'm not going to get into that. But this article really doesn't have anything to do with any of the machines. So let's bring the article up. So, we went through the history of it. That's, basically the history, the title, and what we're looking at. So let's go into the initial statement. And I'm going to basically break this down. We're going to do a lot of reading of the article itself. Okay. So it says, a weird thing happened right after November 3rd, election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Right-wing militias were girded for battle. No, they weren't. Nobody on the right was girded for battle. I could tell you that firsthand. I was right-leaning in this election. So we know that the right doesn't usually protest unless they feel that they've been cheated. So, in a poll before Election Day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about violence. The voicing of that concern was more towards the left. And if so, Donald Trump had won the election, that the left-wing militias that we would call, or mobs, that have been tearing down all of the cities across the United States were going to come out in droves, which is another reason why I think some of the happenstance is that people were afraid, which almost is coercing them to maybe vote a certain way, or they were, we see what was happening to, right-leaning people leading up to November 3rd. They were being silenced, and big tech was not perpetrating the news on the left, only news towards the right. So let's just keep going. Instead of an eerie quiet descended, right? Doesn't make sense. An eerie quiet descended. No, as President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7th, jubilation broke out instead. as people thronged cities across the U.S. to celebrate the democratic process that resulted in Trump's ouster. Now, if if you look at the mobs that were in the cities, or the, let's just say, the people who came out in jubilation, they were very small compared to what other events had been of people on the left. So before we get any further into what the intro is of it, you know, let's look at what they're trying to do. They're trying to perpetrate the left as, you know, they know that they have radicals, but they're saying that it was all peaceful. And they were really worried about the right, militias more. You know, they make them sound almost militaristic when the left, they have their own military right now, if you want to really talk about it. But so what we're going to look for in this specific thing is we're watching the words, and I'm saying that because this next section is where we have to watch the words. And what I'm going to do is we're going to keep going. And after we do the intro, we're going to go into what this article really means. Okay. So a second thing happened amid Donald Trump's attempt to reverse the results. Corporate America turned on him. Corporate America was really, the big corp was never really for him, even though that the majority of the lie proposed is that major corporations were for the Republicans. That has not been since the end of 2008. But let's keep going. So hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump candidacy and supported his policies, called on him to concede. To the president, something felt amiss. It was all very, very strange. Trump said back on December 2nd, within days after the election, he had witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. In a way, Trump was right. Trump was right. Now, is this a omission of guilt, or is this a omission of he was just right because a lot of the media had called it for Joe Biden while votes were still coming in? But see, this gets so much deeper. It gets so much deeper. Now, this next part is where things get a little bit crazy, right? So there was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protest and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little noticed joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL, which is the American Federation of Labor, okay, and the CIO, published on Election Day. Both sides whom would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, racial justice protest, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of the Capitol to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. So let's bring this back to me for a minute. An assault on democracy. They said that this man was an assault on the democracy. His preface of running and his ideology is a constitutionality, or at least a constitutional republic, holding the values which founded this country. So, right off the bat, that's a lie. So, now that we've actually done the intro a little bit, there's a little bit more we're going to get into. But do you see that they were talking about a shadow alliance, or admitting to the fact that they had come together? Now, when we get into the specifics of what this alliance really was, it's going to be sickening what they do and how they do it, and the backdoor meetings and the handshakes that were happening. And if you want to sit there and say that the major corporations were for Donald Trump, that's a bold faced lie. Bold faced lie. Biggest corporations, Apple, didn't like Donald Trump, right? Google didn't like Donald Trump. Facebook, Twitter didn't like Donald Trump. Okay. The NFL, one of the biggest businesses in the world, didn't like Trump. The NBA didn't back Trump. What big business are they talking about? And also, it comes down to a different scenario as well, right? So during these riots, shall we say, a lot of businesses came out in support of BLM and injustice. Why was that? Why? Because they were afraid. They were afraid of cancel culture. They were afraid that the arm of propaganda, which is the media, was going to call them flat out for being racist, for not abiding by the new social justice agendas. This is what really happened. So the stormtroopers came out, the protesters, they broke down cities. Then these big businesses got nervous. They supported these these mobs. The mobs then went on, attacked their enemies in that cancel culture, and essentially they delved into business together. They supported the BLM movement. They supported Antifa. They gave them money. So backing these people, they knew that there was a wing of the Democratic Party that was also backing this injustice mob mentality. So they formed a coalition with these people, therefore, knowing that if they went ahead and got their candidate into office, the favor would come back tenfold. Once they had proposed their seats in Congress, the executive branch, they could go back and say, "Hey, remember that time that I helped you out? Or remember that time I backed those people that you were wanting to back on a political level?" Now, what we can do is you can write legislation, almost like a lobbyist. You can write legislation that's going to benefit us. That's going to benefit us. And that is the big scheme behind the 2020 election. That is the big, gotcha moment of 2020. So there's three reasons and why they would write this whole description of their plan now. First off, optics is everything. Timing is everything. We know next week there is an impeachment, which is an unconstitutional impeachment because the person that they're trying to impeach is now a citizen. You can only impeach a president, a sitting president, somebody who's in office. That's the only way an impeachment works. Not to mention that when they voted on revoking the impeachment in the Senate, it was 45 to 55. They know that it's dead upon arrival. They have no chance to further this agenda. So, what exactly are they going to do with this time, with this moment? They're going to use all of the media, all of the big tech, all of these racial justice warriors, all of the unions that still back them, which many don't anymore because they found out who that candidate that they supported before the election actually was. It was a job killer. But now they get to put him on trial. They get to put his reputation up so that a populist movement that he created will never show its face again. So they can destroy all the people that were with him and they can degrade them and they can call them out and then they can conform them to their ways. Otherwise, you are no longer allowed in this country. And they will do everything in their power to cancel you so you can't have a job. You can't get paid. You can't hold a credit card. You can't get a mortgage. You can't own a business. You can't have a job. Does anybody else see how, you know, morally disgusting that is? The left is supposed to be the party of tolerance, but they're only tolerant if you see it their way. They do not like opposing ideologies. They do not like opposing arguments. And when you come out against them, what happens? You get banned, you get blocked, your voice gets silenced, you get called names, you get ostracized from their community and the community at large because they own quite a bit of each facet of what this country, the business in this country, the social media, the banks. It's it's a wild thing, man. We were already 20 minutes in and we barely got into the article, right? So the three reasons that this that they could be doing this right now, that they could be putting this reason out. Also timing is everything. When the impeachment is coming around, they put this out the Friday before they start. So one of the things that I came up with is this is a victory lap for them, right? This is a victory lap. Like, hey guys, we got it. We won. Look at how we did it. Right under your nose. Look at how we did it. We came together and we kicked you out. That could be one reason. Another reason is they're trying to basically gloat and goad the other people into action, which might be relevant because, you know, if you look at what Bank of America did to give the financial information of people who were GPS located at the Capitol, not necessarily the ones storming into the Capitol, which should be criminally charged for everyone who did, but they're giving them everybody's information so they can let, you know, the FBI, so the FBI could do an investigation and put all those people on blast just for being down there to doing, to do using their civil liberties to go out there and peacefully protest, which is what the transcript says. Or are they admitting to their wrongdoing now that, Sleepy Biden is behind the wheel? And why would they do that? Why would they come out and say that? I think Dan Bongino said it best. So when we go back and say, hey, look, man, also the Supreme Court is going to be hearing a couple of these cases that are still pending from Sidney Powell and Wood, Rudy Giuliani. They're all going to get heard later in February. So what are they doing? They're basically putting this to be mainstream. And Dan Bongino says that a conspiracy has two things, right? Two. I'm going to put it right here for you. Two. There's two aspects of it. One is you talk about it to normalize it, and two is you blame it on the other person. So are they doing that? Are they talking about it to normalize it? So when they say, "Hey, look, this is all," when we approach them and say, "Look at what you did. How did you look when you took everything and all these irregularities and everything got out of control?" And they're going to say, but look, we showed you. We wrote about that in Time Magazine a month ago, 2 months ago. It's not like we hid it from anybody. They're normalizing basically what they did. They're normalizing it by talking about it, so everybody knows about it. But what can we do about it is the question. What can be done? There's so much to go on here. So what's really going on in this article? Do we know? We're going to go back to the article now. What's really going on? They're essentially saying how they got this, how they did all this. They've named conspiracy. They've said cabal in this article. I mean, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen, right? Actually, let's bring it back to me real quick. One more thing. The people who are conspiracy theorists see cabal, conspiracy. They see all these taboo words and they're like, see, I told you. Like, which also activates them into motion, into speculating even further. That's not going to help either. What we need to do is we need to examine this article, the people in this article, because a lot of the times in this article, they talk about a nonpartisan. Nonpartisan means that they're not affiliated with any party. But that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. Almost every person in this article is partisan in some way, and I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove it to you. So, you know, maybe they are trying to they're trying to take credit, maybe they're trying to take credit and place the credit to the right people and in the eyes of the right people. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. Maybe they want to make sure that the right people get the credit for what they did. They don't want to let the administration take that credit because the administration didn't do it. The campaign heads didn't do it. It was this band of social media, corporations, unions, which usually unions and corporations don't work together, they oppose each other, and left-wing activists. That's the group. That's the group. So let's get into it, right? So basically, they talk about the handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election. Now, we all know cross-partisan is they're saying that because, and only because, there are never Trumpers who are going to side with the left because they don't like, because Trump makes them mad. His tweets are mean. His tweets are mean. He makes them mad. They're mad. And they don't want him in office. They want him out. I want to get him out. That's what they're doing. But let's keep going. So basically, as it goes through, you know, do they really think that they're the heroes of the story? Yes, they do. That is also one of the other things that we have written down here. But, they admit it was a conspiracy and they admit that they were trying to take down President Trump. That's part of what we're doing here. But notice how the mainstream media hasn't said a word about this article yet, right? It's because it implements their guilt by association in this whole thing. And they had a part to play because they are the establishment. They are deep state. That is what they are. So, as we get further into the article, it talks about, all these people every week and the allies and the president. So, for President Trump and his allies, they were running out of campaign to spoil. They were running their campaign to spoil the election. This is where they try and paint Trump as the bad guy. They spent months insisting that mail-in ballots were a Democratic plot and the election would be rigged. His henchmen at the state level sought to block their use, while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious suits to make it more difficult to vote. An intensification of the GOP's legacy of suppression tactics. Now, full pause. Full pause. That's a hypocritical statement right there. A legacy of suppressive tactics. Who's getting eliminated right now off social medias, off almost every platform? Who took down Parler? And we're the ones who are suppressive? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And then they blame that suppressive nature and the lawsuits and the conspiracy theories to put pressure on state and local officials, finally summoning an army of supporters on January 6th, the rally that ended with the deadly violence at the Capitol. Now, I'm using pauses to emphasize what we're talking about. Now, the deadly violence was perpetrated by people, and they're still running with this narrative that the FBI hasn't come out and said to the people basically that the people in charge of the beginning of that riot was John Sullivan, an Antifa BLM activist. Were groups that are maybe so far right that they don't align with the mass of the people that were there. Also, we see cops ushering in people from the bike racks. We also have evidence of John Sullivan saying, "Oh, I can't believe we got these people in." They literally went into the Capitol before the president even finished his speech. Okay. Then we got people like AOC who's politicizing the whole thing and saying, "Oh, well, I was scared for my life. They were banging on my door. Where is she? She wasn't even in the right building. She was literally evacuated before the mass of the people got into the Capitol." So they're using it for their agenda. Not to mention, the FBI has come out on record saying that the two pipe bombs that were found at the RNC and the DNC were placed at 5:30 the day before. So that tells you one objective truth. This was pre-planned, right? And then they wanted to put the blame on Parler and say, well, Parler was the echo chamber that they planned this in, knowing well enough that Facebook was the actual culprit of that planning. It was planned on Facebook. But nobody's taking Facebook down, and I'm gonna show you why they're not taking Facebook down. Because they perpetrated this group. They were a part of this group. We're gonna go to a piece later in this article that shows that Mark Zuckerberg had 9 heads of these activist groups at his house for dinner. Backdoor deals and handshakes, man. Come on. Let's keep going. So, basically, what happens from here, right? This guy, Zach Wamp, says, the campaign, the Democracy watched with alarm. Every week we felt like there were a struggle to try and pull off this election without the country going through a real dangerous momentum of unraveling. This was their plan, says former GOP Representative Zach Wamp, a Trump supporter who helped coordinate a bipartisan election protection council. We can look back and say that things went pretty well, but it was not at all clear in September and October that that was going to be the case. So basically, they say this is the inside story of the conspiracy to save the 2020 election, based on an access to the group's inner workings and never before seen documents and interviews with dozens of those involved from across the political spectrum. This is wild. This is wild. They even said a conspiracy themselves. Do you see it? A conspiracy to save the election. I'm highlighting it for you. This is crazy. This is crazy. Okay? So basically, it has dozens of interviews involved across the political spectrum. It is a story of an unprecedented and creative and determined campaign whose success also reveals how close the nation came to disaster. Every attempt to interfere with this is what I want you to watch right here. This is what I mean by words. Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated. Not a proper outcome. Let's change that sentence, right? Every attempt to interfere with a proper outcome of the election was defeated. This is the. So the proper outcome was already predetermined by the wording used in that sentence. Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome, which means that their candidate is the proper outcome. That's it. And then it goes on, it says, this is Ian Bassan. Now, Ian Bassan, we're going to change here, right? So we're going to go back to me, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that from the stream, and then I'm going to share another one. There's going to be another screen here to share, and then we're going to go back to that. So you would think that this man, Ian Bassan, which we get to later, is, well, let's get into who he is first. Let me bring that screen back up, because we're going to get a little bit further, and then I'm going to show you who he is, because he really isn't who you think he is, right? Really isn't him. It's really not what you think it is. Let me make it full screen so you can see it better. So what he says here is every attempt to interfere in the proper outcome, since Ian Bassan, co-founder of Protect Democracy. He's a founder of this, a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. But it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing. Right. So let's get back to Ian. So he says this is a rule of law advocacy group, right? Nonpartisan. If we go back and look at who the founder of this group is, and I'm going to show you with a tweet from 2017 who this man really is. As we can see, we got that large enough? Ian Bassan. There he is. If you donate to these groups, your money is supporting at Real Donald Trump racism. If you're not okay with that, ask your charity to move the event. Let that sink in. This man is the co-founder of a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. Does that look nonpartisan to you? He donated to Joe Biden and his group. This is the charities holding galas at the Mar-a-Lago next year. Number 12 just dropped out. I'm on vacation, so the list isn't updated. Come on, man. Come on. Who who thought that was nonpartisan? Right there, the whole thing's on its face right now, right? So as we get further into it, they talk about this is where it gets a little bit tricky. We're going to go down to the architect of this, right? This is an important part. So let's just go down. That gentleman is a Democrat and a liberal Democrat. Of course he is. So sometime in the fall of 2009, Mike Podhorzer became uh, convinced that the election was headed for disaster and was determined to protect it. Right? Nice. Nice guy. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. He really is. So let me share that back up so we can get that screen back. But, he's a nice guy. I'm going to tell you who this guy is. Because again, he has been a progressive for basically his whole life, right? So what we did is we went over a few things and, we'll backtrack a little bit, but it's okay. So basically they had the social justice warrior organizations, huge corporations. We went over all that. And, this is a loosely organized coalition. It is. Every attempt to interfere, we already went through that. So the next was this gentleman by the name of Podhauser. So let me tell you who he is. Named political director of the American Federal Labor, right? On June 28th, 2011. That's who he was. That's this guy. So also, you know, Podhauser worked in progressive politics since 1976. So what does this gentleman do, right? He wants to save, you know, he thinks that he needs a political strategist. They've already made him a part of this group of people who came together, and he was actually the architect of that group. What he did is he actually started to hold Zoom meetings every week, every week with political activists, the heads of BLM and Antifa, probably, with the heads of corporation. So when we look at this now, we can look and say that this group essentially, and you'll see it later, can turn on and turn off the mob to advocate for what they want. They talk about going into putting poll workers in place and setting up all this stuff for them to basically do with whatever they want. And they do a push for mail-in voting. But we're going to get there, right? So he has marshaled the tactics and the data to help favored candidates win elections. Democratic insiders call him the wizard. The 2000s brought together the liberal strategist group, Analyst Institute, a secretive firm that applies scientific method to political campaigns. It's fun stuff, guys. This guy's a complete liberal strategist. That's what he does, right? So let's move down a little bit further. They credit all the stuff. They talk about all the polls. And then we get, it turned out that it wasn't, the only guy thinking on these terms to make sure and usher in that this political campaign needs to be protected. He began to hear from others eager to join forces. The Fight Back Table, a coalition of resistance organizations, a resistance, right? So basically what they're saying is that, the ultimate rebel is Donald Trump. He's the ultimate outsider. They're the empire. If this was Star Wars, they're Darth Vader and the Emperor. We're the rebels, not them. Not them. But it's okay. Let's keep going. I get so mad at this, but he had begun a scenario planning out around the potential for a contested election, gathering liberal activists at the local and national level into what they called Democracy Defense Coalition. Voting rights and civil rights organizations were raising alarms. A group of former elected officials was researching emergency powers they feared Trump might exploit. So if a president has emergency powers that he can use, they're at his disposal. You can't counteract that. That's not the way that that works. It doesn't work like that. So basically, Protect Democracy was assembling a bipartisan election crisis task force. And it turned out that once you said it out loud, people agreed, Posner said. Posner said that. And it started to build momentum. So as we keep going, it says he spent months pondering scenarios and talking to experts. It wasn't hard to find liberals who saw Trump as a dangerous dictator. But Podhauser was careful to steer clear of hysteria. What he wanted to know was not how American democracy was dying, but how it could be kept alive. Hmm. It's wild, right? Democracy wasn't dying. The people that were uprooting democracy was the left. It was the left. The chief difference between the US and the countries that lost their grip on democracy, he concluded, was the America's decentralized election system. Couldn't be rigged in one fell swoop. That presented an opportunity to shore it up. Did you see that? America's decentralized election system couldn't be rigged in one fell swoop. Is that them omitting it? Is that them like they're not omitting, I'm sorry. Admitting to rigging the election? This stuff is just like the terms that they use in this article perpetrate, criminal activity. Criminal activity. How does that work? You're going to rig the election? So when Trump was walking around calling it rigged the whole time, he wasn't wrong. But how far did it really go? How far? How far? Let's keep going, right? So now is the alliance. This is the alliance of people. Just listen to this part. On March 3rd, Podhorzer drafted a 3-page confidential memo. So they weren't doing this out for the public eye to see. They were doing all of this behind closed doors, which constitute a conspiracy. A memo titled Threats to the 2020 Election. Trump has made it clear that this will not be a fair election and that he will reject anything but his own reelection as faked and rigged, he wrote. So let's stop. Let's stop. Full pause. Who was calling Joe Biden or out to Joe Biden supporters to not concede for anything? Fight them till the end. That was Democratic hopeful Hillary Clinton. That was Obama. So for them to say that, and the funny thing is that, Donald Trump came out multiple times and said, I will accept the results of the election as long as it's free and fair, which he didn't feel that it was. And they didn't either, obviously, on the left, which is what this is showing. They felt like they had to take matters into their own hands, create this alliance, this coalition to make sure that they get the outcome that they desire, not an outcome that was, done by the people, for the people, by what they wanted, by their candidate. Their candidate would have the best possible chance no matter what. And ultimately, they will win. That is what they were saying here, right? So we keep going. This is one of the parts that got me so mad. So on November 3rd, should the media report otherwise, he will use the right-wing information system to establish his narrative and incite his supporters to protest. Come to find out that this whole time they had their protesters ready to go too. So the memo laid out 4 categories of challenges: attack on voters, attack on election administration, attack on Trump's political opponents, and the efforts to reverse the results of the election. They're planning, right? What exactly were they planning? We're gonna get into that. So this goes about, through COVID and Wisconsin is a heavily black Democratic area. And what they did is they had 5 polls opening instead of 182. The vote counting took more than a month in New York. They were looking to shore up ways to make it faster so they could get the answer that they wanted faster in this paragraph, right? So suddenly, the potential for a November meltdown was obvious. In his apartment in DC suburbs, Podzer began working from his laptop at his kitchen. So at his kitchen table, holding back to back Zoom meetings for hours a day with his network of contacts across the progressive universe. So let's see who those people were that were on his Zoom meeting: the labor movement, the institutional left, like Planned Parenthood and Greenpeace, resistance group like the Indivisible and Move On, progressive data geeks and strategists, representatives of donors and foundations, state level grassroots organizers, and racial justice activists, and others. So, do we not see what, like that's a wild thing. He's got it's like how he's in touch with ELM, all the rest of them, activists, okay? So, basically, the media became the meetings became the galactic center for the constellation of operatives. Do we see that? The word operatives? Operatives. I've highlighted it for you. The rhetoric in this article is wild, right? So what they were doing here now is that they were realizing that within their space, they all had the same goal, but didn't always see eye to eye. And now that they were trying to protect the vote at an unprecedented scale, as 2020 progressed, this movement stretched to Congress, Silicon Valley, and the nation's state houses, which means legislations, judicial branches, executive branches of state level governments, right? It drew its energy from the summer's racial justice protest, and many of whose leaders were a key part of this liberal alliance. And eventually it reached across the aisle into the world of Trump skeptical Republicans appalled by his attacks on democracy. This is crazy. This is crazy. Really, this is just them. They're building stuff, right? They're building things. This is what they're building. They're building a coalition so they can literally have every avenue covered. They get to set the narrative. They get to set what everybody says. They make the moves and they want to silence and disservice anybody who's not with them. That's what they're doing here. That's what this is. So, you know, it goes into a lot of different stuff, but one of the people that they brought on board, and this is one of the most important people, right? What they were trying to do is the first task that they had now with securing the vote was overhauling America's bulky election infrastructure in the middle of a pandemic. So, for the thousands of local and mostly nonpartisan officials who administered elections, the most urgent need was money. And what do they mean by this? They mean that they wanted to go in and change the election laws so that they could use the mail in voting process. For what? So they could exploit it. They wanted to exploit it. They wanted to harvest. They wanted to make sure that they had the ability to make all of these different ballots come back with their guy on it. This is their manipulation of the post office, of the poll workers, they rigged the game, making sure that they had protective equipment so everybody could go and get and register and their absentee voting in states and mail in ballots, every voter. This is what it comes down to, right? So Basically, they needed $2 billion in funding, okay? The $2 billion in funding, it wasn't gonna happen. So what did they do? They ushered in a private philanthropy and stepped into the breach, and an assortment of foundations contributed tens of millions in election administration funds. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Priscilla Chan and her husband, Mark Zuckerberg. This initiative is a to build a more inclusive, just, and healthy future for everyone. That's this goal by this specific group, this foundation. So, they chipped in at 300 million, and it was a failure at the federal level that 2,500 local election officials were forced to apply for philanthropic grants to fill their needs. This is by a woman by the name of Amber McReynolds, a former Denver election official who heads the nonpartisan National Vote at Home Institute. National Vote at Home Institute? What? McReynolds' 2-year-old organization. So how did they know that they were going to vote at home before that? I know there's absentees and things like that, but here's the part I wanted to show you too. Let's get back to this part. This is important. And then we're going to speed through a little bit of the rest of it because there's a lot going on here, right? So this is where it gets crazy. So basically, McReynolds' 2-year organization, they were struggling to do all the things they needed to do. They basically called this an election tea crisis, and they wanted to shorten the lines of polling places, and they wanted to prevent that because they wanted mail-in voting. So the institute worked to help 37 states and DC bolster mail-in voting. But it wouldn't be worth much if people didn't take advantage. Part of the challenge was logistical. Each state had different rules for when and how ballots should be requested and returned. The Voter Participation Center, which is in a normal year, would have deployed canvassing door to door to get the vote out, instead conducted focus groups in April and in May to find out what would get people to vote by mail. And in August and September, it sent ballot applications to 15 million people in key states, 4.6 million of whom returned them. In mailing and digital ads, the group urged people not to wait for Election Day. And all the work we have done for 17 years was built for this moment to bring democracy to people's doorsteps. Sick. So then it goes into people being disenfranchised, yada, yada, yada. At the same time, there was litigation, and the pandemic intensified, and the parties were trying to tangle stuff in the courts. But here we go. The disinformation defense. This is one of the most important parts, right? So bad actors spreading false information is nothing new. For decades, they had people with, flyers and phone calls and basically downing people. But Laura Quinn, a veteran progressive operative who co-founded Catalyst by studying this problem for a few years, she piloted the nameless secret project, which has never before been publicly discussed, that tracked disinformation online and tried to figure out how to combat it. One component was tracking dangerous lies that might otherwise spread unnoticed. Researchers then provided information to campaigners or the media to track down the sources and expose them. Hold up. Bring it back to me. This group has no name. This group has never been publicly talked about. You got to be kidding me. Does that not smell like crap? That smells like crap to me. Did somebody fart in the room? Somebody? No? That smells like garbage. It also smells like corruption. Okay? That's what corruption smells like. Never been talked about before, but you were already a group? What are you, a black ops for the FBI or the CIA? Who are you? No, they're throwing money at it. Throw money at it. Throw money at it. It'll change it. So it keeps going. And this is one of the things that like I thought was wild. So if we go down here, they had the ammunition and in 2019, Mark Zuckerberg invited 9 civil rights leaders to dinner at his house where they warned him about the dangers of the election related falsehoods that were already spreading unchecked. It took pushing, urging, conversations, brainstorming, all of that to get to the place where we ended up with more rigorous rules and enforcement, says Vanita Gupta, president and the CEO of the Leadership Conference of Civil Human Rights, who attended the dinner and was also met with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey and others. Gupta had been nominated for the Associate Attorney General by President Biden. So let's get back to that, right? This woman puts together this Ministry of Truth, which is what they're trying to pass now. Now she gets a seat in the cabinet. There she goes. Paid off, didn't it, huh? Really paid off. Really running it down the line, right? This is almost criminal. This is almost criminal because now, whatever that party, the Democrats, deems as disinformation, these propaganda arms, which is social media, gets to take them down. And then they get to persecute the user of that. We're in the middle of that storm right now. Still, from that time to now, this is what has been happening. This is wild. This has literally been going on by their own admission. Okay? By their own admission. Now they're spreading the word. So as we keep going, they keep putting money. They really wanted to get a group of, former elected officials, cabinet secretaries, and military leaders and so on, aimed mainly at the messaging to the public, but also speaking to local officials, the secretaries of state, attorney generals, and governors who would be in the eye of the storm to let them know we wanted to help. This is like Brad Raffensperger and the damn governor in Georgia who should have been tossed out for getting in the way of actually making sure that the votes were legitimately counted and audited properly. But they wouldn't give that information up. They were standing up for democracy. How arrogant. Democracy is not one party. Democracy is two parties. And being able to verify and check and having discourse and being able to talk about it. But when you silence one side, you no longer have a democracy. You have an authoritarian state. So we keep going. It gets wild. I want to get down to where they really put stuff into perspective, right? So they went to like voting rights and into action. And basically, what this guy did was when it came time to get people out there, you know, what they were doing was collecting data, right? This Podhorzer was collecting data, right? And he wanted to get a blue shift in the battleground states, and it says it all right here. Meanwhile, Podhorzer was warning everyone that the polls were underestimating Trump's support, and the data he shared with the media organizations who would be calling the election that he shared with the media organizations. Now we know how they get hand in hand. This guy, Podhorzer, right? But calling the election was tremendously useful to understand what was happening as the votes were rolled in. According to a member of her major network's political unit who spoke with Podhorzer before Election Day, most analysts had recognized there would be a blue shift. How would they recognize that? How would they know that days leading into the election? How? Because they were told, "We got this. Don't worry. Something to worry about." Which this guy Podhauser says to people on the day of the election. So keep going. The surge of votes breaking towards Democrats, driven by tallies of mail in ballots. But they hadn't comprehended how much better Trump was likely to do on election day. Being able to document how big the absentee wave would be and the variance by state was essential, the analyst said. What? So they had figures basically predicting what what they needed in order to win, right? So they know how many ballots and votes are out there as some mail-in ballots. They have a projection of how good Donald Trump was going to do. Therefore, we have all this stuff about how they were calculating in real time. They had it at state level ready to go with the apps. How many absentees were out there? How many they would need to win? This is crazy. This is wild, guys. This is wild. This is wild. So now it goes into the people power. The racial justice uprising sparked by George Floyd's killing in May was not primarily a political movement. The organizers who helped lead it wanted to harness its momentum for the election without allowing it to be cooperated by politicians or co-opted by politicians. Many of those organizers were part of Podhorser's network, from the activists in the battleground states who partnered with the Democracy Defense Coalition to organize with leading roles in the movement for Black lives. What? So they were basically in charge of the mob, running Podhorser's plan the whole time. Uh, Now, I mean, I don't know how much further we have to go. They literally had all of it and the media on top of it, all left. This is like downright and dirty. There's nothing, there's partisanship. There's no nonpartisan. And now what are they doing, right? Let's look at now. We're done with that article. It could keep going. We could keep going. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to scroll down. We're going to read you the last couple sentences of this article. So basically, they have one called Standing Up or Standing Down and Showing Up, right? And they were surprised that, the liberals were calling, or at least Fox was calling Arizona for Biden. The TV anchors were bending over backward to console caution and frame to count the vote accurately. The question became what to do next. The liberal allegiance gathered for a 11 p.m. Zoom call. Hundreds joined, and they were freaking out. It was really important for me and the team in that moment to help ground people, and what we had already known was true. That's what she said, right? Basically saying, don't worry. We knew Trump would lose. We knew it. Unperturbed when I spoke last night, the returns were exactly in line with his modeling. And he had been warning for weeks that the Trump voters' turnout was surging. And as they dribbled out, he could tell as long as all the votes were counted, Trump would lose. How do you know that? How do you know that? How did he know that? Because it was all the master plan, right? So it's a lot of this, all this is how close we came. It's a lot of rhetoric, but let's get down to the end here, right? So this is for the basically the former Michigan GOP. What happens is it gets into this area where they're talking about actually how they're going to go about doing this and how is it all going to work out. Then they get to the point where Michigan was having problems, so they were using people to pressure politicians to get what they wanted. They were threatening them. They don't say that per se, but we know that that's what it was, right? So let's go here. So it says this, right? It's like when Wile E. Coyote runs off a cliff. If you don't look down, you don't fall. Our democracy only survives if we all believe and don't look down. So basically, don't look at the corruption, what's going on, and how it came to be. Just know that it is. Right? So now at the end of the article, it says democracy won in the end. The will of the people prevailed. But it's crazy in retrospect that this is what it took to put on an election in the United States. Who's putting it on? The people put it on, not these groups. They're saying as if they put on the election. But then it goes back to that Wile E. Coyote thing. If you don't look down, you don't fall. That's how our democracy survives. We don't look. We just make sure. We don't wait for them to do their voting. We make sure he's going to win. That's what I get out of this article, guys. You know, this is disparaging. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen moving on forward from this point. So we'll keep reporting on it. And I know I didn't go totally full and through the article. It's 6,500 words of complete liberal brain syndrome, shall we call it? LBS, liberal brain syndrome. And it's sickening. It's sickening to see how they coerced and cooperated. And, you know, censorship was a big thing. Making sure that all of their arms and all of the pieces of the coalition, you know, were stopping disinformation. Certain stories were fed as disinformation and came out later that were actually true, like Hunter Biden and the rest of it. So I'm going to put this up on YouTube, Rumble, and BitChute. If it gets taken down off of any of those places, you can find it at the other places. You know, it's a wild story. And, you know, China has a lot to do with this too. We're going to get into the how in a second part of this series and, or why we did the how today and how it all went down. But, you know, the why has a lot more ties. The last episode we did at Full Spectrum News had a whole segment on China. But this is going to be, you know, it's going to be a long, long expose of just a lot of crazy stuff, guys. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and staying here for the whole hour and 8 minutes. You know, God bless America. God bless our patriots. And God bless our heroes, the military and the police. Knowing your enemy is really half the battle, and being able to counter attack, or not attack in a violent way, but counter produce against them, shall we say. So with that being said, I just want to sign off. Thank you guys for showing.